creates a quake. The Namibia Media Trust is highly invested in establishing platforms that facilitate the engagement of young Namibians with diverse social, economic, and political issues that affects their lives and that of their communities. One such initiative is the hashtag YouthQuakeNamibia, a youth development initiative designed to create a safe space for young Namibians to develop greater understanding and skills to become agents of change in their personal and in their societal communities. With that said, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nelago Johannes, and I'll be a moderator for today's discussion. Without any further ado, let me introduce our panelists for the night who will be helping us in uncovering and discussing the topic of the night. We have Mr. Christiaan Keulder, who is the researcher and author of our briefing paper. Can we give him a round of applause, please? Then we have Lonata Penondyo, a youth activist and a law student. We have Ms. Shelleygan Peterson, a well-sought-after journalist. And then we have Gerold Dreyer. Sorry, there was a little bit of a tricky one with the name. A representative from the Global Shapers Windhoek Hub. Thank you. As our 8th episode of the It's a Quack podcast, we would like to introduce our topic for the night, which is youth participation in the national agenda through mass media. Are young people actively participating, represented, and heard in the political spaces? Now I'd like to hand over to Mr. Christiaan Keulder to give us a brief and overview of the topic that we'll be discussing for today.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to share some of the research with you. Just a little bit of background. Most of the data that is being used in this paper originated from the Afrobarometer survey that we've been conducting across Africa since 1999. So we've got approximately 20 years of data. We're currently just completed round 9's fieldwork, so beginning of next year, we'll be able to update our time series data. I think the topic is a very topical one. Globally, democracy is in trouble. This year was the 15th year in which Freedom House reported that we're in a democratic deficiency, where the number of countries who has become less free, or the extent of freedoms being curbed, exceed those who've made gains. And you'll remember Namibia's independence reached its peak when the former Eastern European countries came down and became democratic. Now that trend is now being reversed, and even long-established democracies such as India and the United States have had their freedom scores revised downwards. Namibia at this point is still regarded as a free country, but I think it's not untimely to ask whether or for how long this will still be the case. The Afrobarometer survey is not a youth-specific survey. It is a survey that covers national populations. It's around 8 has been completed earlier this year and involved 34 African countries. So we have a pretty good idea where Namibia features in all of these questions. The issue around the youth, of course, is on the role of youth in politics. The one is a perception that see the youth as a revolutionary force, often associated with bad socioeconomic conditions, high unemployment, and then often violent resistance to the government of the day. The second view is one that sees the youth as dropping out of the political system, developing strategies to exit from the body politic, and as a result becoming more apathetic and having less of an impact. In Namibia, when we started doing these surveys in 1991 even, we had only 28% of the population living in urban areas. Next year we have another census, but estimates are that 58% of the population now live in urban areas. So for most part, politics in Namibia has become an urban affair, and that of course has a huge role on what the youth has to do. The second feature of the youth that is very important, that stands out, is the unemployment. Youth unemployment is very high. Our surveys suggest for 18 to 25, almost 48%. And then from 26 to 35, another 40%, which means, one, that young people in Namibia will remain financially independent or dependent on parents or the state. I think the UN estimate is 27 years. What it also means is that by the time people turn 25, you can almost forgive people from 18 to 24 or 25 to be unemployed. People are looking for opportunities. They may take a gap here. They may do all kinds of things. But from 25 years onward, their reliance on societal resources, whether that's their own, their families, becomes quite significant. And in addition, it also means that around 40% of that age group that should be paying taxes are not paying taxes. So the combination of having better educated people with very low levels of employment, I think, is a potential recipe for big problems. We address a number of attitudes towards democracy in the paper, and I can just give you a very short summary of those. First of all, we find that young people, like Namibians overall, are not great supporters of democracy anymore. I don't know if you're familiar with Winston Churchill's famous hypothesis that democracy is probably the worst form of government except all others. So support for democracy is now at its lowest level it's been since 1999. And this indeed is something that we worry about. Basically, the argument is that democracy becomes consolidated when the citizens of a country no longer think about other forms of government as more desirable than democracy. The second feature, and one which leaves us a bit perplexed, is that Namibia, including the youth, is very happy with the degree of democracy that they get. They either think Namibia is a democracy with small or minor problems, or they think Namibia is a full democracy. And these two things don't seem to line up too well. South Africa is another case where we see this, but it's certainly something that stands out for Namibia. A third feature is that participation in politics is low. We see that amongst 18 to 25-year-olds, the majority no longer supports or feel close to a political party. In fact, only 42% of young people feel close to a political party. And only 22% of those 18 to 25 have voted. When we look at the next generation, the 25 to 35-year-olds, things get a lot better. So maybe it's like the very young people, when they leave school, they've got no political experience, maybe socialization is still developing, but amongst them, political participation is very low. And we also see it in civic participation and civic actions. Protest potential is very low, and participation in civic action, attending community meetings, attending organization or belonging to organizations and so forth, are low. And then the final point, when we've asked Namibians what do they think the most important problems are that needs to be addressed, we generally see three things standing out over the years. The first is always unemployment. The second is always education. And the third is poverty. The youth is no different from the rest of the society in this way. There is no distinct youth agenda unless we want to create one. And my suggestion would be that if you look at going that kind of route, that combination of unemployment, education, and then specifically the issue of poverty, which is almost the result of unemployment, is a big issue. So what we found then is that the youth participate, of course, as expected, a lot freer on social media platforms rather than traditional media. Not necessarily for news, but most certainly for other social interactions, which opens up, I think, a number of opportunities for this generation to start building a kind of a youthscape almost, a safe, free space where the youth can debate their agenda, can define their agenda, and then devise ways and means to assert an influence on the national agenda. I think the media is more important under circumstances where the youth do not seem to be part of the conventional politics of the day. I think there's a big crisis looming for Namibia's political parties overall. During the first Constituent Assembly, the ruling party's Constituent Assembly members, the average age was around 45 years old. If you look at those same people now, they're pushing 70 and 80. So a lot of things have happened, but the generations and the younger generations, I do believe, hasn't come through and has lost their voice in conventional politics. And maybe that makes the media so much more important and also interesting. Thank you.
I think it's important, and we are grateful that you even took the time to do the research, because we'd possibly not be here discussing the topic of today. Without further ado, let me also introduce one of our other panelists, Ms. Daisry Mathias, the Presidential Advisor on Youth Matters and Enterprise Development. Can we give her a round of applause, please? I'm so happy. I'm not in the hot seat today. So, Gerold, in reference to the briefing paper, research shows that in 2019, only 43% of Namibians between the ages of 18 and 25 years felt close to political parties. This is compared to 67% of those who are 56 years and older. This is further supported and quoted that there is a clear disconnect between the youngest cohorts of the Namibian youth and the country's party system. Not only is this segment of the youth said to display low levels of party attachments, but they also abstain from voting. My question now is, what are the factors attributed to the disconnect, in your opinion?
Thank you so much for the question.
Yes.
One of the issues that we as a youth organization, also as the Global Shapers, was trying to achieve was this civic engagement, or just exercising your civic rights to essentially vote. Part of the reason why the youth generally don't vote or feel like their vote counts is because they feel so disenfranchised with the political parties or with government in general, mainly because of these issues that are not addressed. Like the gentleman said, those three main issues that I guess across the board everyone wants addressed, but especially for the youth, they just feel that, generally when it's election time, the political parties come to their areas, even informal settlements, you have these rallies where they really encourage people to vote, but at the same time, there's this notion that as soon as you voted and elections are over, right, there's no follow-up. So I think 2019 was, in as much as there wasn't a large turnout, I think it's where things started shifting, slowly but surely.
Very true.
And that's really where you started seeing the youth being like, you know what, not voting is not an option anymore. Because we felt like if you don't take part, right, you don't have my vote either way, so nothing is going to change. And you started slowly but surely seeing this shift in like your voice does matter, it does make a difference. That one vote that you are not putting in, compared with like hundreds of thousands of other youth, could make a big difference.
Very true.
So in as much as the youth turnout wasn't as high, that's really where the shift began with those elections. One of the things that I think also youth organizations started doing was really having these engagements, like these public forums, where they brought mostly youth representatives from the political parties with the youth in the same room.
Exactly.
And they really were like asked these difficult questions, and not to compete or fight against each other on the panel, but really speaking to why should we vote, right? But at the same time, can we hold you accountable? Because we know there can be a change in, like, your vote is your voice, but really it's that mindset shift to just getting it done, actually going out there and voting, queuing up for a few hours, but you really have to make the change. And I think with the next elections, we're probably also going to see a much bigger difference, right, in terms of the voter turnout. And that's really where we start seeing these differences, where we actually hold people accountable for what they say they're going to do.
Yeah. I like that, and I think it's true. I do agree that the turnout, while it probably wasn't the best, I think it has grown, and we can see a little bit of growth in terms of youth participating in political spaces. Ms. Daisry, from your perspective, what are some of the most notable changes brought forth by the 2020 local and regional elections in Namibia's political landscape and youth involvement?
I think the country is 31 years old, and we're definitely maturing. We're maturing in our democratic, in our social, in our economic, in our political character as a society. And a lot of it is visible also in the evolutions that we're seeing in the social political landscape of the country. The moderator was very specific to ask me about the shift in 2020. But I think we always need to take a view of context over time.
Okay.
And I would like to draw some contrasts between 2014 elections and 2020 elections, because I think both of them were significant occasions in our country's history. 2014, we had a record turnout of young people. If I'm not mistaken, Kirsty, we had 48% of eligible young people vote in the last election. This was the election that ushered in President Geingoeb's presidency. But what was very notable about this election is that it was the election in the history of our country that recorded the highest level of participation of voters since independence. If you look at the numbers, we had increased from 56% as a majority party to 60%. 2014, the ruling party received a mandate of 80%. But what was even more outstanding is that the presidential candidate in the person, Dr. Hage Geingoeb, had received an 87% majority vote in a multi-party democracy. That is indicative of a number of things. It is indicative that the president had received a mandate even from people who were outside of the party, but it was also indicative that the young people, who are a demographic majority, had a meaningful role to play in delivering that mandate of the president. So what changed between 2014 and 2020, 2019 elections, which is what the moderator really wants me to speak to? From my perspective, young people still used their voice at the ballot. Young people, who are the demographic majority, still use their numbers to influence the outcome of that election significantly. And what we saw is an increase in the number of political actors. There has definitely been an intensification of actors. But what we also saw was a pattern in the rise of independent candidates, which I think is indicative of the burning desire of young people to get to the forefront of the body politic, which to me is indicative sometimes of a problem. Perhaps it's symptomatic that maybe young people feel that they are not progressing quickly enough through party structures, and therefore they need to detour, bypass the system, and reach the platform directly. But what motivates young people, I think, is a deep love for the country, a desire to get involved in forming solutions. Leadership is about providing solutions, and I think when this trend of independent candidacy, I think, is a burning desire for young people to form part of the solution. We've also seen an increase in activism between 2014 and 2020. I was appointed in June 2015, and within my first week of office, that was the time that Joe, Dee, and George occupied that plot in Kleine Cooper. That was really the beginning of a rise to social activism in Namibia. And I think activism is important. in a vibrant, functioning democracy. I think activism is important to hold elected leaders accountable. It's important to hold public office bearers to focus, to execute, and to report on their mandates. And then the last part about the concluded 2019 election, I think is the outcome. What was the result of that election? We had a diversity of political parties, new parties entering our parliament. And these parties also brought with them a lot of young lawmakers. It is notable that for the first time in our country in the 31 years, we have up to 5 lawmakers who are born frees. That means we have 5 lawmakers who are under the age of 31, which is really remarkable in our country's history. And I think that wouldn't have happened without some of these fundamental changes in the vote of the young electorate. That's my perspective for now.
Wow, beautiful perspective, and I couldn't agree much more. Ms. Shelleygan, right after that, when looking at access to information, how much concise effort is being put in place for all citizens to better understand the information that is provided by the government when talking about, for example, the national budget, national election, abortion, vaccination, Harambee Prosperity Plan, and etc., etc., when a majority of this information is being decimated in English, including the statistics? In your opinion, is this a determining factor of youth participation in the national agenda?
Yeah. If we look at some of a survey like Open Survey speaking to the participation in the budget processes, it tells you that Namibia is very low in terms of participation, and that's of the overall society. Very low in terms of about 20% of people truly have participated in processes like the budget process, for instance. When it comes to bringing it down to the ground, it is sort of, in my opinion, what I've seen is that we often rely on the media to do the work for us. And yes, it's good, they should inform, but it should be your duty as any organization, any political party, any government to go to the ground and speak to the people yourself. Have consultations with them. If we look at, for instance, now with the abortion debate, you see the National Council actually taking it to the regions. They were in the Ronga region recently to have consultations on abortion. But that's just abortion. If we're talking about the budget, do we see the budget being more sensitive to the youth? Do we see the youth actually understand the budget? If you go and ask them, for instance, do you know what the national budget is? Do you know it was allocated to the National Youth Council? Do you know how much was allocated to the Youth Council? And will that, for instance, benefit you? We don't see that. If, for instance, at the Namibian, we have our different shows, and our different shows require us to go to the streets and speak to the people, for instance, about the budget. Let's take that, for instance. If you ask them where the money should go, they will say create employment. But the understanding of what creating employment isn't really there. So the understanding of the overall processes in our country lacks a bit, because our education system doesn't necessarily tell you, oh, this is what the budget is about. Our education system doesn't speak to the systems and processes. It doesn't speak to the development that we need to see. It doesn't speak to, okay, there is this, there is the national, the NDP5 or NDP4. Do you know what that is? Do you know what the sustainable development goals are? They don't know, because these are documents and concepts put out there, and it's great that it's there, but do they understand what it is? And perhaps, yes, I would agree that the youth's participation in that manner, it comes down on them, on whether they want to consume the information. We see people now consuming information now more than ever. They're very interactive on social media in terms of news. We've seen our interactions on social media boost in the last 2 years. When I was doing my research when I was in university, we could see a clear difference between, for instance, 3 years ago to now, where we are now. And that's because social media has brought it closer to them. And it is this lack of interest also from the youth side. And it's not because they don't want to know, it's that they don't understand why they need to know. So or even if you do take it to them, they'll ask you, but why do I need to know this? Why is it important to me? And that understanding process lacks in our education system, lacks in the tertiary education system itself. University does not tell you, it has contemporary issues, where it talks about the certain processes of government, the certain processes of the country. But it doesn't speak about why it's important for you to participate. We also see a lack of these discussions at dinner tables. Do we still have dinner table conversations where you guys discuss national issues? Do you and your friends discuss it on a general basis, where you talk about political parties, where you talk about, okay, the budget is out this week, and of course we see most of it going to education, but we don't feel it in actual fact. So there is this, I feel like it's a bridge between the youth wanting to participate and understanding why they need to participate, and the systems and processes and institutions also creating and breaking down information to a point where the youth can disseminate it or not disseminate it, take it in the way that they want to take it in. Much like the First Lady used to say that the youth will speak to you how they want to until they get what they want. We saw it with Shut It Down.
That's powerful. I love it, love it. Just to add on to this question, would you say it would be beneficial of us to kind of translate our statistics and this information in some of our indigenous languages? Because in my personal opinion now, I would say it's one thing to gain access to this information, but what happens now with the disconnect between us as the youth that are educated and us communicating these ideas to the older generation, because some of them do not understand English. What do you think we can better do to kind of convey perhaps this information off to the other to the older generation?
I definitely put it in all languages, but as we've seen with COVID, that's not always going to happen. You know?
Okay.
It would require an organization to say, I'm going to take that extra step to put that information into all the languages. And I'll come back to it every time. It comes back to our education system. We had for instance, recently the Africa peer review mechanism put out a targeted review on youth unemployment, and it spoke about the mismatch between the youth and, for instance, the tertiary, the labor market. And it didn't just highlight that, but it highlighted that there is this understanding that the education system itself is separate from the rest of society and its systems. We don't see, if you come out of high school, do you understand that you are 18 and what 18 means in terms of the country's systems that you need to partake in its democratic processes that you need to partake in to be sort of a responsible Namibian, a responsible youth. Translating it into different languages, it would be great. Yes, let's do that. But will it be consumed is the question. Will the information be consumed in the way that it should be? Do you understand what it means to vote? Do you understand what it means? Voters' empathy, if you look at even civic education, it's not reaching the ground from what we've seen in terms of just stories that have written. Right before elections, we have this culture to go out onto the streets and ask people. And generally they say, why must I vote? And it's a constant thing. It's because civic education continues to just be a miss in everyday life, not just 3 months or 6 months before the elections, but not just before the national budget, but overall, every month, do we see sort of a civic education activity happening? And that's what I'm saying, at the end of the day, we leave it to the media to disseminate this information, which is great, but what are you doing as an organization to ensure the youth that you encounter with? Do you speak to your interns about just their civic duty or their duty as a youth in Namibia and their participation in the democratic systems?
Okay. Shelleygan touched on something important in terms of education. Lonata, how critical is the role of education in an individual's ability to process complex political information and have a better sense of citizen responsibility?
It's a quake.
It's a quake.
It's a quake.
It's a quake.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I think with regard to education, it's a factor in terms of, with regard to young people's processing complex information, making decisions, and also their involvement in the national agenda. I think education plays a very major role. For instance, we have seen in 2018 what gave birth to what we call like independent candidate, as alluded by the fellow panelists here. We have seen that in Ondangwa Eben, when there was a by-election, I think it was prompted by the issue of, before, people did not know that there was a democratic constitution provision for us to actually stand as an independent candidate. But these things are actually enshrined within our constitution. But then education plays a major role for us to actually understand that what is the route for us to take to be able to exercise our democratic right. For example, Daisy alluded to the party system in terms of young people trying to manipulate the system, maybe not to wait longer. So they want a shortcut. In terms of that, many young people do not understand. They've not studied their party's structures and systems and constitution in terms of how do I get to a party list? How do I get to parliament? Of course, there are two ways that you can get there. One is either you are actually a member of that party, and then you are in the structures, and then again that party nominates you for either to be a regional and local authority candidate, or as a presidential or actually national assembly. And then the other one is for you to be nominated by a minimum of people as per Act of Parliament in terms of you standing as an independent candidate. But I think these things comes as a result that many people are not actually aware. And now we have seen that the birth of independence candidates is because of young people that actually have understood, have actually read the various acts of the ECN and actually our constitution to actually try and exercise their democratic right to participate in national agenda. Because then before, we only told that no, for you to be a regional councillor, you need to be above 50. Or for example, our constitution specifically says that for you to be president, you must be 35 and above. But as a young person that is probably out there aspiring to be president, do they know about this thing, this article in the constitution? So for me, I feel like education plays a major role in young people's participation in national agenda. Only then you understand also what party do you want to belong to? This party, which ideology that it subscribes to? So then I think that actually give in context of what education plays. For example, if you say no, this party is a socialist or it's a capitalist, what do you think about it at the end of the day? So I think this got to do with civic education also. Do we educate the people? I know there have been a lot of NGOs that have been doing quite a good job before election to do civic education in various community, hosting various panel discussion, community awareness. And it's through this discussion that many young people and the community at large actually became aware of this process and system, how to actually participate in the national agenda.
Thank you very much. I think it's true. You can't do better if you don't know better. So in addition to that, I do believe that even though education is very important, I think at times it's important for us as young people to take the initiative to educate ourselves as well. It's not only the government or the political space's responsibility or mass media to educate us, but also our own responsibility to go out there and search for this information so we are better equipped to make quality decisions as opposed to just turn out in numbers and really not make much of a difference in quality or making better decisions for the country as a whole. Ms. Daisry, still on access to information and in relation to what the previous speaker has mentioned, how big of a need is passing the Access to Information Bill in relation to youth participation in the national agenda?
My response, would touch on a number of things. And I will get to the bill as well. But I think the first point of departure is cognizant that we are in the information age, that there is a lot of access to information online, and that as development practitioners, we live with the acknowledgement that at any given point in time, a young person in our country in a very remote community or a very poor underdeveloped constituency like Opor, which is the poorest constituency in the country, by virtue of having access to data at their fingertip, they've got access to information. And this information sometimes can contrast the disparities, the inequalities, the privilege and the opulence of their peers, maybe living in a more urban area. And this can really create a lot of distress and frustration. So for us as development practitioners, we live in the constant awareness of the urgent need to deliver development and to deliver information. Because in my experience, poverty is not always about a lack of resources. Most of the time, poverty is about a lack of access to information, because that information usually will create an access to an opportunity for development. With that said, I think the government has been very intentional over the past few years to bring government services closer to the people by using technology, by putting systems online, putting information online. We talk about the third and the fourth industrial revolution, and my fellow young people were saying, why are you talking about the fourth when you have not harnessed the third? We have started to harness the third. Computer systems, electronics, putting information online. That's why, to some extent, we're able to provide e-governance. We're able to better manage public information and to better manage and to harness public data. So when it comes to the Access to Information Bill, there's context around the bill. The bill doesn't exist in isolation. The first thing that I should probably just highlight is the spirit of the bill is talking about permissible access to public information. Because we have to agree that not all the information that is within the custodianship of the government can be made available for public consumption. Because part of the role of the government is also to protect our confidentiality. It's embedded in our constitution. And it is for this reason, for example, that the Minister of Home Affairs is prohibited by the Constitution to share things like the National Population Register, because it has very sensitive, private, personal, confidential information. And information becomes a matter of sovereignty. It becomes a matter of national security, personal security. So the person who owns and is taking care and protecting the custodian of that information has a very big responsibility. I think the Access to Information Bill is important, especially in a sophisticated democracy like ours that is maturing. It's important for the media and for civil society to have access to certain levels of public information as far as is permissible. So I'm definitely going to just emphasize the commitment of the government. This is one of the bills that has been included in the Harambee Prosperity Plan as a priority instrument for promulgation. It's right in there, but I also just want to indicate that it's not always what it may not serve the very purpose that we expect it to serve, because the Access to Information Bill also has objective to protect public data. It's not going to be an instrument that makes everything available to everyone all the time, because that actually may not be in the public interest.
Understandably so. Just to add or ask further, you were speaking about how we are living in the information age. What is the government or what are the political institutions doing in enabling that internet access is available, readily available to everyone, because it's one thing to provide the information online, but what happens to the child in the rural areas that could potentially not have access, does not have Wi-Fi? What are we putting in place to ensure that this dream also becomes a reality if and when now access to information becomes part of our systems?
I started by mentioning that my conviction is that access to information is a matter of equity, because it really can undermine and it can also promote opportunity and access to personal development and progression. And I think in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, all of us here will agree that access to Wi-Fi is even becoming like a rights issue.
True.
We feel denied if we're not able to access the internet. So governments are making those strides in order for us to build the necessary infrastructural capacity to roll out access. Let's begin with the fundamentals. Before you talk about internet, that phone, that computer needs to be plugged into a power socket. So it's about energy supply security. It's about electricity coverage. But our country has done well in terms of electricity in urban areas. We've done well in terms of boosting our generating capacity of power. But we also acknowledge that with a 21% rural electrification coverage, you cannot talk about access to internet or universal broadband coverage because large parts of our society are not yet connected to electricity. So that's one. If we talk about ICT infrastructure, we are doing very well. We are at 80% ICT, 4G. 4G, there's pockets. It's better in some areas than others. But generally, in terms of universal access, we're at 80%. We want to move to 100% coverage. That will require a lot of things. It will require infrastructure. And you pick up in the Harambee Prosperity Plan that government is now making a push for mobile network operators to actually come into an agreement to share their towers, to share their infrastructure and their investments, because this will have a benefit on the communities, because communities will now be able to access, to benefit from coverage. The rates of data will go down because the cost is not shifted to the consumer. And we've seen very good examples by private corporates like MTC, who have started to subsidize 4G coverage through their products like or smartphone.
Yeah.
A smartphone is developed specifically to improve the access to 4G connectivity for Namibians in the rural areas, because now your grandmother, my grandmother, can have a smartphone at $500. I was in the north and I was listening to an Oshiwambo radio station, and I was very impressed to hear an advert in vernacular teaching that listener how to do WhatsApp, how to do video calls, basically how to use 4G smartphones. And I think this is actually what is going to bridge the disparity in inequalities, in income, is access to information. And we have to get the infrastructure and the hardware deeper into remote communities.
Love it, love it. Thank you very much, Daisry. I would like to give our audience an opportunity to ask questions. I would like to give 3 people to ask any question in regards to the topic that we're discussing for today.
Good evening.
Good
My
evening.
name is Quake, and I probably just have one question, but I don't want to ask. So my question to the researcher, the one who did the research, my question is just, how do we compare to other countries in terms of Southern Africa or in Africa? How do we, the youth in Namibia, compare to other countries, such as just actually continentally or regionally? How do we compare?
Thank you.
Good evening. So I think my question goes to Daisry. So this year in Parliament, there has been over 4 bills put on the floor of Parliament. 2 of them is about reforming the High Court and the Magistrate Court. One of them is a state-sanctioned homophobic bill, and the other is an appropriations bill. Only one of those bills have passed, which is the appropriation bill, so government has prioritized funding their own pockets besides uplifting the people. So my question is, if the access to information bill is something that government and you believe is important and is priority, why hasn't it been tabled yet, especially a bill that's been written by civil society and prominent civil society groups? So why hasn't it been tabled, and why hasn't it been discussed and debated and put on the floor of Parliament for vote?
Thank you very much.
All right, good evening. My name is Nakanda Nikongo, and earlier this year I was very fortunate to be part of the Namibia Media Trust to give an idea of unemployment. So my question is regarding unemployment. So my question is, what could be done to the private companies and public companies to reduce unemployment in Namibia, because it's high, and then when you look at the country level that other companies or private companies are asking, it's two-way high, and then you're just a graduate from university, you don't have any experience, but you qualify to go through the process. What could be the level of post? Maybe there will be maybe a consideration regarding the system that need to be redone regarding to the graduates to reduce this unemployment, because if we cannot reduce the unemployment in our country, it is among us the youth, then we don't know what to do with the next years to come in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I trust our panelists were listening and the questions were highly directed, so we can start off with Mr. Christiaan.
Yes. I think it depends on a number of factors where Namibia fit. So let me go through memory. On corruption, Namibia is now one of the countries that are perceived to be the fastest growing in corruption. We are among the top 5 or 7 in Africa. With regard to support for democracy, we're at the bottom end, or not bottom end, but we're at the lower end. We're slightly above the average, but we're at the lower end of the good guys. We've recently published a number of reviews of Southern African countries on the Sustainable Development Goals. And Namibia has done really poorly, together with South Africa. I think one of the issues that is coming to the fore in Namibia is the distancing from democracy, which is something which we haven't spoken about tonight, but maybe we could reflect on it. Is it because democracy is not delivering the economic goods, such as employment, uplifting poverty? Is that why we're no longer interested in democracy, and should we try something else? So Namibia, in the beginning of the survey, back in 1999, used to be one of the standout cases, success stories. A lot of stuff in Namibia has declined, especially since 2014. With regard to the youth apathy is not a Namibian thing, it's an African thing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christiaan, for your insight. Ms. Daisry.
Thank you very much. Am I permitted to react to my fellow panelists' interventions
Yes, of
before
course.
responding?
Yes.
And I think it's important to just, to be cognizant that sometimes we are victims of our own narrative, especially in the information age. I found in my experiences as a development practitioner that we shape a narrative about our country on the World Wide Web where everybody's listening, and the entire diplomatic community and development partners, multilateral organizations are also following. And these perceptions become entrenched as the reality of the country. And then later we end up with a front page news that says X, Y, and Z about Namibia that we're not really pleased and proud of as citizens, but it's actually the produce of a perpetuated narrative. We, of course, from a government perspective, I'm cognizant that there are diminishing levels of trust. I'm cognizant that there has been a number of incidents that would have affected perceptions about our country. But to make a statement that Namibia is right on the bottom of the indices for corruption, I think we also have to tread carefully, because we can also contrast on governance architecture on things like the Mo Ibrahim Index, where Namibia is actually top 5 governed country on the continent. The president has entrenched the principles of accountability and transparency within the public sector's governance framework. And I think these are principles that are here to stay. And what we need to look out for as young people, because you will hear it from a developing nation that every society will struggle with corruption. The litmus test is, what do you do when corruption presents? Do you deal with it decisively? And I think as young people, what we must demand for is for the reckoning, for those who are found guilty to be held accountable. And I think in our context, there are consequences that we have been seeing increasingly for those found on the wrong side of the law. I think it's important that we use redemptive language about our country so that we do not continue to perpetuate harmful narratives. I just wanted to share that perspective from a government official. But to try and respond to the question on the appropriation bill, the nuance was that the government and the legislators who passed the appropriation bill first did so to prioritize their needs opposed to the citizen. But of course, every lawmaker is in the parliament as a representative of a constituency, the sovereign who surrendered their power to elect a leader to represent them. So whatever decisions are being made in the legislative house are always and should be in the interest of the constituent. The appropriation bill, however, is so important because that is the funding mechanism that actually allows every single public ministry to receive a budget in order for them to deliver the public good. Delaying an appropriation bill would delay the disbursement of finances for education, for public health, for defense, and this could be quite harmful for the broader society. To the access to information bill, and exactly where it is in the pipeline. I don't want to speak because there are authorities, and my colleague, Honorable Emma Theophilus, the Deputy Minister for ICT, just concluded a countrywide roadshow where she was educating communities on the role and the purpose, the importance of this bill as it makes its way to Parliament. I'm not sure exactly, and I do not want to speak under correction to say that it is going to be tabled in the House of Parliament on this date, because I don't have that date as yet. But what I can say with authority of information is that this is one of the bills that has been put for tabling for 2022 for promulgation. It's being expedited and it has been prioritized. Unemployment. I attended yesterday a launch by a private sector organization for a graduate employment program where they're doing work-integrated learning, internship, and they're creating employment opportunities for young people. And I made a statement yesterday to say that I don't talk about unemployment, not because I'm in denial about our society's problems and our economic problems, but I choose to focus and to expend time and energy on solutions. I think we must speak about what is going to get us out of this crisis. We should expend our energy talking about reforming our education curricula, creating a transition mechanism from higher education into the labor market, cooperative education, work-integrated learning, a national internship and apprenticeship program. Then we need to talk about supporting businesses who are already in the economy so they do not close. We need to talk about supporting young people to create their own businesses, entrepreneurship, enterprise development. Let's talk about how many enterprises do we need to create, how many jobs will these new enterprises create, which industries and sectors are we going to create these jobs in. Then we're using redemptive language and we're expanding our time, I think, more productively. I just want to say that government has its eye fixed on the unemployment figures. We're also pursuing new industries that can create new jobs. Agriculture lost most of the young jobs because of the drought. We lost 48,000 jobs in agriculture since 2017. Hospitality supports 150,000 jobs directly and indirectly, and tourism. We lost those jobs because of COVID, nearly half. We've lost jobs in construction because of the contracting economy. You get the drift. We are in a state of deindustrialization. So the question, the economic policy now is, where are the new frontiers of jobs? Where can we create new opportunities? That's why the president is aggressively pursuing our blue and our green economy. We're aggressively pursuing green hydrogen as strategic bet because we believe we can create more new jobs. We're pursuing agriculture. The Minister of Agriculture has promised to put 10 of the government green schemes up for public-private partnership. that is an acknowledgement that the state might not have the capital to inject into our green schemes, but we believe that if we can crowd in the private sector, we'll be able to harness their finances, their expertise, so that private sector can support and work with government to create more jobs for young people in agriculture. So we're definitely taking decisive action to create more new jobs and opportunities for our young people.
Thank you very much, Daisry. On the question of unemployment, would anyone else on the panel would like to add any thoughts? Yes, Ms. Shelleygan.
Between last year, January, and this year, September, we lost over 14,000, almost 15,000 jobs. If we look at 2018, we almost lost 20,000 jobs. If we're looking at the youth in terms of unemployment, in 2009 to 2020 financial year, the Minister of Finance allocated 15 million to the National Youth Council to essentially create jobs for the youth. When we inquired earlier this year as to how many jobs were created from that 15 million, permanent jobs was 86 jobs were created. We are in 2021, going to 2022 next year. From that 50 million, about 3 million was spent on the organization's businesses itself, operations itself. The rest of the money was about 9 million left because about 3 million was used for horticulture, which is set to create, I think, about over 50 jobs. We are yet to see that. They created over 200 temporary jobs by youth going to the communities and making them aware of COVID-19 and sanitizing and what you do to fight the virus. 86 jobs were created from 3 million or 15 million, let's say. So that was done. We look at the construction sector, we look at SME development. I mean, SME development in itself, SMEs, one of the economists in fact said it's SME funding is the country's biggest handicap. Because when we speak about SMEs, we're speaking about people who don't have collateral. The banks ask for collateral. We have schemes that are focused on SME development. Development Bank of Namibia has a scheme for SME funding, but SMEs still on the ground still continue to say that we don't have access to that. It's not something that we can access, but it seems more like an elite scheme rather than a person who essentially comes from the south and has a business and can say, okay, let me go to the Development Bank of Namibia. It's very difficult to get that funding. You have a company such as Pollen Finance from South Africa, who in fact rather puts the risk out there and funds SMEs. And they were established in 2018. Youth unemployment is currently under debate in Parliament and has been for a while. Even if you look at the targeted report by the African Peer Review, they list so many things that have been regurgitated so many times. And we have so many conferences. We had the National Conference on Education that speaks about reforming the education to speak to the labor market, yet we don't see that. We still have a mismatch. We're talking about creating a body the report spoke about creating a body, for instance, to help the Office of the President to assist them with youth development. That's the National Youth Council's job. So are we really going to address youth unemployment or just unemployment as a whole? Or is it more lip service? When we speak about giving access, we speak about the quality of it. Access to information needs to speak to the quality of the information you're giving out. If you're just going to say, I'm going to give you a speech that I'm going to put on my website that you will have access to, what does that speech speak to? We still use 2018's youth unemployment rate. We are in 2021, we are in a pandemic where over 14,000 people have lost their jobs. Where's the new statistics People have come out of school, out of university. They still don't have jobs. We're speaking about creating innovative ways to employ the youth and recognizing the innovation. Recognizing, for instance, if you look at the Global Shapers, if you look at some of the people there, they have created their businesses out of themselves. And it's because some of them had the means, others didn't have the means.
Wow.
So is youth unemployment ever going to be solved if we're just so focused about urban and not the rural? Because the rural youth matters.
No, I think I agree totally with the issue of mismatch of the skill in the industry. Because you will find that I think there must be a direct relationship between the institution of higher education and the job market. Because some of the courses, I think they've also been saturated. We keep producing, graduate into the main job stream whereby we don't even know after 5 years, do we do a census to actually look how many people actually absorbed in certain field and program. Because then you realize that somebody that did human resource and somebody that did psychologist, they can actually do all the HR practitioners, some sort of. So now that is a problem already. Now we have skills mismatch. Somebody is employed as a procurement officer, but he or she did IT, and it's happening. So I think we need to free some programs from the perspective of trying to actually limit producing graduate, but then the market is already saturated.
Very true.
Yeah, that is my input.
Thank you very much. Not necessarily that someone is right or someone is more informed than the other, but just to have such discussions so that everyone gets to make a decision. But also, at the end of the day, it's important to have different perspectives. How would we rather grow if we never find ourselves clashing on views?
It's a quake.
It's a quake.
It's a quake.
It's a quake.
To continue, Ms. Shelleygan, you are once more on the table. Recently, a certain youth member of the LGBTQIA+ community won a $50,000 Namibian lawsuit against the Namibian Police Department. In addition to that, there was a certain video circulating where a local political leader was openly condemning the LGBTQIA+ community using strong derogatory terms. In your opinion, why is it that in a circular state such as Namibia, there is still an open limitation and condemnation of the LGBTQIA+ community?
This stems back to just how society is set up.
Okay.
We tend to label the society as very conservative, very religious orientated. If you look at Parliament and the discussions in Parliament, and actually condemning a member of Parliament speaking in a derogatory manner about a community, that speaks to it all. We have a National Assembly member speaking about the community in such a way, and we did not see members of Parliament stand up and say it is not okay to speak about someone in that manner, about a community in that manner. It was rather shut down, which is what is done with most of the issues. We tend to just, for instance, if we talk about abortion, which is also very much sort of, if you look at the age and the issues with the youth and being pro-choices and being pro-lifers, it's just, we tend to shut down conversations that don't feel comfortable to us instead of looking at facts. We have people not wanting to hear some of the points being raised about, for instance, the LGBTQIA+ community. If you speak about it, are you willing to sit around the table? Because you're basing your facts on religion. And as you said, we're a circular state. It's that we have the idea that religion should be everything in this country, and that's how we should go about it. But can we step out of our religious belief and actually listen to a conversation? For instance, we had Elma Dienda in Parliament say that she feels uncomfortable speaking about certain topics, but it's about stepping out of you know, your idea and your beliefs, and actually believing that a community, let me hear them out. I always want to draw this discussion to, for instance, the discussion around apartheid.
Yeah.
We want to have discussions about the LGBTQIA plus community with the Christians. Do we do it with the Buddhists? Do we do it with the Muslims? Do we also allow racist people to have a debate about the rights of people of color? Do we do the same? Are we prejudiced because our faith here creates an inner moral, inner conflict that we need to face, and ultimately we're going with no, a community does not deserve, for instance, the right, certain rights in our country. And although we say no, there's no state-sanctioned homophobia, if you look at certain instances where we've spoken to certain community or members of the queer community where they've said if they go to a clinic, it's extremely difficult for them to go to a clinic because of the prejudice they will face. It's extremely difficult for them to walk into certain places. If a member of a transgender woman goes into parliament, will they risk being disadvantaged against? It's the idea of our religion being put aside and actually having an open discussion about something. Parliament couldn't discuss, for instance, the queer community or the remarks, the derogatory remarks made against them in Parliament. No one could say something at that point. What does that say for the rest of the debate when it does come to Parliament? If that was just remarks being made. On social media, we have a more open platform and people are held accountable for the derogatory language. That's social media, that's online. But in Parliament, we don't have the same. Do you correct someone when they use a derogatory term to the queer community when you are around them? Because it's about the merit of the debate. It's not about attacking someone's persona. That's when we have a difficulty, because it's that moral conflict that you need to face, that the country, as a conservative country, we're still struggling to get to a resolution of this conflict.
Thank you so much for your input. I think I would also like to add that I think it's important as leaders or anyone that's potentially wishing to get in a position of leadership, that when you decide to lead, you should be the servant of them all, in the state that you don't necessarily forget yourself, but forget your ideas and what you think should be correct, and become objective enough to sit in a space where it might not necessarily seem right to you, but what is objective, what is unbiased in that specific situation. Lonata, I would like to ask, to what extent would you then say that this is a contributing factor to the level of participation from the youth in the national agenda?
It is very important because we have a variety of people from different background, different input. And our input probably might open somebody's eyes and might awaken somebody who did not know. For example, I want to make reference to our constitution because it's one of the best constitutions we have in Africa. In fact, if you look at Article 17, in terms of sub-article 1, speaks about once we are 18, you attain the age of 18, you surely have that right to vote. And once you attain the age of 21, you can actually be elected to public office. I think at this discussion, that's where we also take some sort of form and substance from the engagement, and for us to be able to understand. And the emphasis should be for us as young people to read more on the laws that the country have actually promulgated. Because I think then at this discussion also, you don't just learn about, you also get awakened, some sort of an activism that you sit, you listen to what the people are saying. So you're also being educated because we all come from different backgrounds.
Very true.
So I just want to emphasize the need of young people to continue reading, because they always say that many young people are very lazy. If you want to put a big project, just put it in writing. They will not read. So we do not read. That's why sometimes we can't even participate in our very important engagement. For example, they've been I've seen that they've been the Parliamentary Standing Committee have been going around the country to discuss and to hear input from citizens whether or not to legalize abortion. This is actually where we are actually exercising that constitutional right to actually influence government policy. But then some people might not take it when say there's a community hearing or there's a community meeting. We do not participate. But at the end of the day, when you have policies out there, when you have acts of parliament, we never had our input. So I think it's high time that as young people, whatever activity that is to influence a policy, that tomorrow it will actually be either holding government accountable or to have an effect to you, which we must attend. And I would just like to emphasize the issue of, I'm not sure, 2018, I think there was a consultation with National Health Policy. And I can see that Madame Daisry has been one of the key people. So many young people are actually drawn to participate in this consultation around the country. And that is actually what we ask, because sometimes when they're invited, young people will not want to come sit for an hour to listen and give input. But at the end of the day, when the policy is out or when there's no service delivered, who are you going to blame?
True.
So I think it's very important that we participate so that we are also having our voice heard when we contribute.
It's very true. I think it's very important to actively participate in the decision-making platforms, because they are there. If you're not going to show up, then don't cry about it when tomorrow the results are out and you're not happy about it. Last question I would like to ask to Gerold. Oh, I've been very quiet for the night. Do you think that there is a fair representation, and is there a system put in place within the political space that strengthens the participation of youths living with disabilities? Is there room for improvement?
That's a really good question, actually. In as much as, like one of the panelists was alluding to earlier, we've seen this shift of more youth representation in political structures. Some might say it's more tokenism, which I disagree with to a great extent, because these youth have come to the table and have really shown what they're capable of and what they can do. Then there's also this notion that they should be now held accountable to really drive this youth agenda, right? In terms of youth with disabilities, there's this term called triple mainstreaming in some organizations, where it's including people with HIV and AIDS, disabilities, and also women and girls. Yes, there's obviously a lot of inclusion of women and girls, mainly because it's not so much a mainstreaming issue, it's more of a right. So it's so much easier to include women. It's not even a topic anymore, right? It's like, it has to be done. But when it comes to people with disabilities, it's actually like multiple, there's multiple issues that are attributed to that. Mainly, people that have disabilities are generally hidden away, or they're sent to the villages to a certain extent because of the families being a bit embarrassed, but also because people with disabilities don't have access to basic services. Like, they don't get an education necessarily. They don't go to tertiary education, like tertiary institutions and so forth. So people with disabilities are already disadvantaged, not only by their families, but also by society as a whole. So it's really hard to say, we're going to have a consultation, we want people with disabilities to come out, because these people generally don't come out of their houses, right? So how do we go about consciously including these people? One way to do this is obviously through civil society or civil organizations, community-based organizations, to really start highlighting the plight of these individuals and start addressing these issues that they have. So not just upskilling and educating them, but then also start involving them in this political sphere. Yes, again, you want to include them in the political structures. To what extent? And again, is it a tokenism thing, right? But yes, I think there's so many other issues that have to be addressed first before we can include people with disabilities. And again, it's the shame from themselves as well, because they also hide away from society. But yes, I believe it shouldn't just be a topic or thematic issue of we want to include people with disabilities, but we need to address all these structural issues that attribute to them not being part of society or being visible in society.
Thank you. We're about to come to the final part of our discussion, but as I'm thinking, I'm realizing that when it comes to politics and when it comes to the participation of young people in politics, it has a lot to do with so many other stuff. It's just not one thing that we can pinpoint to. Oh no, it's unemployment. Oh no, it's the fact that we're not well educated. It's a collective whole, and for us to actually get to a point where we can see results that we are happy with, it is important that we make sure that we work on the whole part of Namibia, the part of Namibia where young people do not have access to internet, where young people might not necessarily be properly represented, and in spaces where young people don't feel heard because they have graduated and have not gotten employment. I would like to give the platform to three people from the audience, to give us final contributions. We cannot take just as much questions, but any final contributions. And if you do have a question and the panelists have a very 1 minute short, sweet and short answer, we will be able to take that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Beata Armas. I'm a deaf person from the Deaf Association. And I wanted to just perhaps step onto the idea that the gentleman just spoke about now regarding persons with disabilities. I wanted to find out, for example, government is setting up perhaps, we have got Honorable Alexia Manobe in the office of the Vice President. She's alone there as a person with disability. And she's also actually alone in Parliament as a person with disability. And maybe at times you find that fortunately, we actually have got a National Disability Council also that was set up. But my observation is that the challenge that I'm seeing is that Madam Ngube is actually working with a lot of people that are not having disabilities. So she's actually working solo on issues of disability. And then if you look at the National Disability Council, even that space is occupied by those without disabilities. Those with visual impairment are not there. We are not there. So, and that's where the challenge, that's what I'm trying to challenge now. If we have got platforms where we're supposed to be seen and representing ourselves, yet we are not there, how are we supposed to actually be seen or to be helped, if at all? So many times, perhaps when, for example, the office of the Vice President have got Honorable Ngube, we should be in that office. We should lead. We should actually be able to lead ourselves and do things on our own. For example, the National Disability Council now, there's a lot of infights, and who is fighting? It's people without disabilities. And where are we? We are at the periphery of all these issues. And many a times, because we are very illiterate, we hardly go to universities. So they actually say because we are not educated, we belong nowhere, or we don't have power, mandate to rule ourselves, or we can't really lead ourselves. And that's, I think, where the challenge is. So because we are uneducated, they take our space, and then we are left with nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for speaking up.
Hi, my name is Loide Foniangula, and I'll try to be very brief with what I have to ask. Now, seeing that the majority of the population of our country is the youth, but the representation in the parliament is mostly the elders, the people that are beyond the youth, how do we then, and I feel like this was supposed to be a great part of the discussion, how do we then close the intergenerational gap within the politics in our country? How do we then ensure that when these old people retire or get out of the system, how do we ensure the longevity of our politics, inclusive of everybody in all age groups?
Thank you very much, Loide.
Good evening, my name is Gaya Kavita. I have a short question. Seeing the fact that we don't have diversity in our political parties, how effective can having political parties that have similar objectives year in and year out actually be?
That's powerful. Okay, this was supposed to be the final contribution, not questions, but since it's one discussion, clearly seems to be one where we seem to want to keep it going. Time is not on our side, but we can give the panelists to each answer one question, 1 minute, 2 minute max. Please time yourself.
Okay. To the lady in the front, thank you for echoing those sentiments, and I think it's a great it's a great initiative that we have, or the NMT actively decided to bring people from the Disability Council of Namibia here to be here today. Some people can say also that if you go out into a community and you're actively, let's just have workshops with people with disabilities or people who are suffering with HIV and AIDS, that it's reverse discrimination or whatever else they try to term it as, or that you discriminate against able-bodied people, which is not the case. Again, one way to include people with disabilities, and that companies also do in other countries, is that they have this kind of quota on hiring people with disabilities and not just announcing it in your pamphlets or your vacancies that we're looking for people with disabilities or those from disadvantaged backgrounds, but actually making a conscious effort to employ and upskill these people because they lack those basic skills that they were denied through lack of access to education or being hidden away from society. Also, with regards to, there was a question about, I think it was Lloyd's question, regarding this intergenerational gap. There's obviously this notion that for the longest time, the political systems or the structures were the people who mostly fought in the liberation struggle and older generation, right? And now we see more of an influx of younger people, and then there's this disconnect. And you can see it, I guess, in debates as well, how fiery it can get. Because the youth have strong, and especially also between different political parties, where it'll almost be termed as disrespect because of how we are culturally and socially brought up to respect our elders. But at the same time, they bring across very relevant and valid points, but I guess it's in the approach and the way that they're doing it. There is a lot of infighting, not only between the different generations, but also there's a lack of transference of knowledge and skills. The young people have great ideas, they're brilliant. The youth are, as everyone has said it, very well educated compared to the other age groups. And at the same time, the older people obviously have had some experience as well by being in the systems and the structures, but there has to be this transference of skills and knowledge and expertise, because at some point these youth are going to take over essentially, and they're already doing that. So I think we have to, I guess, humble ourselves on both ends and really think about the betterment of the country and how we can work together to make our systems work properly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gerold, for your input. The next question is Daisry.
I'm kind of just going to give my closing remarks and include some of the perspectives that were shared by the speakers.
Perfect.
And I think engagement educates. I think the more that we dialogue and the more that you bring young people into the mainstream of the discourse, the more we learn and we sharpen each other's perspectives. It was incredibly refreshing for me to listen to the speaker on the differently abled people, because it touches on some of the core issues of our democracy, is representation, the share of voice. It talks about mainstreaming. It talks about the need for a critical mass. And I can empathize as a young person in government, in political office, because similar to my sister, you're also looking for a critical mass of representation. You're also looking to mainstream your agenda. The same with women. So I think that these are things that collectively we are able to champion. My experience has been that there's usually a difference between political office bearers and the public service. I have found that there are fewer young people in the political offices, but there are a greater number of young people in the public service doing the work. The same sometimes about women, the same sometimes about differently abled people. But I don't want to discount the fact that there's need for a critical mass. Even in Parliament, I'm happy that we have 5 born-free lawmakers. Maybe if we increase the ceiling to 40, we've got about 10, 12 youthful parliamentarians. But realistically, we know that that is not enough to really, really represent our generational mission. The same with differently abled people. They would want a critical mass because they understand the lived reality and they feel better conversant with the issues. It's not always that you must be differently abled to empathize and understand the issues of, but I do think there's a distinction. There's a difference when it's your lived reality. So I think young people are united. I would never describe young Namibians to be apathetic. For me, there's no apathy. Young people are engaging political structures. Young people are expressing their voice at the ballot. I think it increasingly so. I think that young people care about this country. And I think that it's about an impatience to succeed. That accountability, that demand, it's a progressive demand. It's not because they have resigned to their fate. President always says if people become quiet and they stop talking, then there's danger because they've lost hope. And I don't think we're a hopeless generation. A lot of people talk about young people and they say, and they like to quote Fanon and they say, define your mission or betray it. And I think that we have defined our mission. Kirsty talked about it. He said, you said, are we trying to draw the distinction on what is our generational mission, what is our plight? And I think we talk about the issues that matter to us. I think we represent the issues that matter to us. We bring them into the mainstream of the discourse. We're talking about poverty. We're talking about unemployment. We're talking about inequality. We're talking about systemic exclusion. We're talking about land. We're talking about shelter. We're talking about NASFAF and education and unemployed graduates. This is our mission. It's invisible. It's hard for us because it's an invisible force. Politically, it was easier to say the enemy is that white man who was oppressing us based on racial system. But economic forces are intangible. But let us not lose focus that this is actually our generational mission. So I would like to thank the organizers of this platform. I think it was extremely enriching for me. I learned a lot. I'm taking away a lot. But I also just want to remind young people that the society we have is a direct mirror of the society we've produced. This is who we are. The laws that we made are a reflection of our values and what we have said is important to us. The laws are our common standard of what we said yes and no to. So as we continue to evolve as a society, we can only do so when we make a contribution as the members of this society. And I commend everybody online and in the room for making that contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisry. Lonata?
Thank you very much. The colleagues that actually they've asked the question. I wanted to respond to Lloyd. I think the intergenerational between the elders and the young people that are in parliament. I would say that it's high time that young people become active in political structures for us not to cry foul of being left out, because at the end of the day, we find that the elders are more serious. Even when it comes to voting, we are not serious sometimes. So young people should take political activity very serious at the end of the day. Be part, either join a political party, because it's actually a constitutional right for you to join any political party, for you to be included on either their party list, as you've said that there's actually a need. But I also like to allude that yes, the young person, the 5 young people that we have in parliament currently, of course, the head of state has actually exercised one of the constitutional provision to appoint the young people that are in parliament currently. So that's why I'm saying we have a very good constitution. Of course, they did not, probably they were young people that were on the party list, but they could not make it. But then the president saw that there's a need, and there was that provision. Secondly, I think it's not really about the intergenerational gap, but it's also more about the concept of young people saying that politics is a dirty game. So we want to be, we want fast wealth. We don't want to be in a party structure for 5 years so that you also groom politically. At the end of the day, we end up doing or messing up the country, because at the end of the day, I'm concerned as a young person, that are we really ready to lead public office? Because at the end of the day, we are going to mess up. So join political structures, be groomed, and understand the processes and systems and institutional, how they operate before we start jumping to be members of parliament.
Yeah.
And I want to thank everybody here. I think the discussion was very positive and informative. So thank you very much, colleagues, my fellow panelists, and the entire invited guests.
On Lloyd's question, I think it's about information transformation.
Yeah.
Not transformation, sort of allow information not just to stick with you, speak to those around you. The intergenerational gap is created because we don't speak to each other enough. We don't have, as I said, dinner conversations. That's kind of why we have the issue of the low vaccination rate, because our dinner table conversations aren't held enough. We don't have that enough. We don't talk about issues enough. We don't transfer information from one generation to the other. If I can give you an example, we have an issue in our newsroom now. We have a brilliant court reporter, but he's older now, and at some point he will have to move out. And at some point we will have to move to a point where he transfers the information, the skills and expertise he's built over the years to the next person who's going to be the brilliant court reporter. We don't transfer that enough, and we need to take that up. When you get into a role, whatever role that might be, even as a journalist, even as, for instance, a children's mayor, for instance, do you have someone with you that's younger than you that you're transferring that information to? Because it doesn't start when someone has been in a job or has 25 years experience, and then we have a new person coming in and only has 1 year experience. It comes down to start from a very young age, or a very young time when you do start and you get into that position. Take notes of your struggles and teach that information and skills. Transferring it to the next generation is what we need, essentially. And I think the youth needs to understand that you have a responsibility that goes beyond social media. You need to step into that space now. We are coming to a point where you need to understand that you are going to be the next leader. It's not just talk, it's the truth, it's a reality. Step into your glory. I see more civic action from the youth, which is great. Get into the political spaces. Speak about issues within the political spaces. Criticize it robustly, and demand for the implementation. We are 30 years young, 31 years young as a country. Perhaps this is part of the growing pains, and this is the moment where you need to be conscious of your role in this country beyond just you being a youth in Namibia. You are the next leader. What are you going to do about it?
Lastly, I'd like to just give a last opportunity to Mr. Keulder to also just give us his final remarks.
You know, as I was listening to the conversation, I was just sort of thinking back when I was this age, in this generation. Every generation has their challenges and their issues. And when people talk about what the youth should or shouldn't do, we often lose the voice of the youth. It's an older generation trying to coach a younger generation into what is good and what is not good, and what is acceptable and not acceptable. And I think the only real advice from my side is to not let your democracy go down. Without it, your struggle is going to be a lot harder than what it already is. And then for the rest, you know, good luck. You're going to need it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. From us, #It'sAQuake on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Make sure to like, follow, share, and comment. Until next time, goodbye.
It's a Quake.